I made a video about best jobs for autistic people recently, and one of the major conclusions was that sometimes it's not the industry or the specific job role that makes the difference, but things like how long is your commute? What is your office environment like? And the general culture of the workplace. How does your employer treat you, and are you able to access any accommodations? So today I'm going to talk through over 80 accommodations for autistic people, and I'm sure a lot of these could apply to other neurodivergent people as well, such as ADHDers. Some of these will be ways in which you can accommodate yourself, whether you're diagnosed or not, including some super helpful apps. And I'm also going to go through a load of accommodations that you could ask your employer for in the workplace, or you could use for yourself if you're self-employed, and also accommodations for school, for studying. Because even after a diagnosis, it can be super hard to ask for help if you don't know what's possible, if you don't know what you're entitled to. I hope this video can help a little tiny bit. Maybe some employers are watching. If any employers and teachers are watching, please note that all autistic people are different. It is a spectrum. There's no one size fits all solution when it comes to supporting autistic people. It's always best to not make assumptions and to speak to the autistic person you're supporting about what they actually want and need. And remember that that person might be a little bit timid. I know I would be. They might feel like they aren't allowed, they aren't entitled to things that they actually do need. In my experience, autistic people can be quite apologetic. We can have people-pleasing tendencies and not want to cause a fuss, not want to be a burden. So we might need a bit of reassurance and encouragement sometimes. Let's start with some apps you might find useful. I've got a mixture of things that I have enjoyed and things that I've seen recommended online, and then I asked on my community post for app recommendations, and you all came through, and by far the most highly recommended app on the community post was Finch. Finch is a virtual pet, a little bird, and you care for them by caring for yourself. You name your little pet and then you keep him healthy by reaching goals that you set for yourself, such as drinking enough water. I don't know if this would work for everybody. Maybe some of my PDAers, some autistic people who are more demand avoidant, this wouldn't work and your poor bird would suffer. I don't know, but maybe it's cute enough to override that. And I think for some people, and clearly for a lot of people on my community tab, the gamification of self-care can work really, really well. My neurotypical husband has actually used this app before himself, and he really loved it as well. So there we are, we have the neurotypical stamp of approval for whatever that's worth. On Reddit, I saw this comment, clinical psychotherapist here, I endorse this app, exclamation mark. It's like a hug when you didn't know you needed one. It teaches self-compassion. The next app is if you want to gamify brushing your teeth specifically. I don't know if anyone is like me. I remember having this moment when I was a child where I realized I will have to brush my teeth twice a day, every day, for the rest of my life. And I remember thinking, even when it's school holidays and like most expectations are calmed down and I'm supposedly having a relaxing day, I still have to brush my teeth. And I felt like this heaviness, the weight of the world on my shoulder. If you can relate to that feeling, there is an app called Pokemon Smile. It's aimed at children, but who cares? And I know many people watching also have neurodivergent children, so this might work really well, but even if you're just a Pokemon loving adult or you just find it super cute, it could be a way to just kind of give yourself a bit of novelty and to push yourself through what is often, a non-preferred, non-enjoyable task. And yeah, you basically catch Pokemon by brushing your teeth. I love that this is something that exists. It makes me really excited. Warning, it does take some photos of you while brushing your teeth. And there's also Pokemon Sleep to gamify your sleep as well. Someone on the community tab said, Pokemon Sleep, it has helped me develop a decent sleep schedule. My insomnia isn't going anywhere, but the game motivates me to go to bed before the date rolls over, lol. The inspiration we needed. You can pair it with a smartwatch and you attract Pokemon by sleeping. There's an app called Tappy, which you can use in place of a fidget. Might be worth downloading in case you forget your fidget toys when you're out. If you're prone to forgetting, bringing them along. If something isn't attached to my body, I'm probably going to forget it, which is why I always revert back to just stimming by pinching my neck rather than using fidget toys. But my phone is often quite close to my body. You can play little games on it as well. A lot of people seem to enjoy how it vibrates as you use it. Goblin Tools was another app that has come Highly, highly recommended. It's designed for neurodivergent people. It has a feature called the magic to-do list, which automatically breaks tasks down into smaller steps. You just type in the task and then it generates it in different steps. Plus there's an estimator, which can give you an idea of how long things might take. I spoke quite a lot in my recent video about signs you might be neurotypical, about time blindness. So this could be helpful with that, although I did try asking it how long it thought it would take me to make a YouTube video, and it said 2 to 10 hours. I wish that was true. I think 10 hours is on the lower end. It's probably more like 10 to 40, but you tried Goblin Tools. It also has a formalizer that you can use to make your tone more professional or less professional, or a bunch of other things. Grammarly is also another one that I use. I have the plugin downloaded. I've had it for quite a few years and I really appreciate it. It's really helpful because I'm quite bad at making little errors and typos. I do it all the time and it catches a lot of them. Like, it will find something every time. It will find a mistake. The NHS Leicestershire partnership recommends time management and scheduling apps for autistic people, and I'm currently using Xtiles, which is a great way to organize your life for free, and Xtiles are also very kindly sponsoring this video. So if you know me, you know I don't love sticking to a routine, but I do need some way of keeping track of what I'm doing. We've just hit December. There's a lot going on. It's too much to hold in my brain, but I'm also diagnosed with dyspraxia. My handwriting is a mess. I need a digital planner. However, a lot of productivity apps are confusing and overwhelming. It takes ages to figure out how they work. Xtiles has been described as Notion for people who don't have the time or patience to figure out how Notion works, which definitely describes me. If my productivity app requires me to spend 2 weeks figuring out how to use it, then I'm not going to be being very productive, am I? You can use Xtiles on both computer and mobile. It will sync seamlessly. I think it's ideal for a lot of autistic people and ADHDers because it is so visual. Visual supports are often recommended for autistic people to communicate information clearly. With Xtiles, you could literally make a schedule entirely out of images if you wanted to. You add tiles to your various pages, hence the name Xtiles. Tiles are like digital sticky notes and they can contain video, audio, text, code, lists, and more. You can move your tiles around and change the colors. If you want to create a more traditional to-do list, you can click the new task button and then you just type in your task. You can also add a deadline and or reminders. Your tasks will appear in a menu in a convenient list, and you can integrate your calendar so your whole schedule appears in one place. If you need a bit more help designing your page, their template gallery is great with weekly and monthly planners, goals, trip planners. In my Xtiles project, Meg's Magical Notebook, I have a daily planner. I've also started thinking about goals for 2025, which sounds scary. A space for me to journal and a vision board for my new filming backdrop. I hope you like how it's coming along. It's not boxes anymore. The boxes are gone. If you want to try Xtiles for free, you can use the link in my description. The free version has so many features, but you can also go premium, which will give you extra features like setting up recurring tasks and access to more templates. Back to virtual pets again. There's something called Void Pet Garden. The art style looks super lovely, super cute. Enter Void Pet Garden, your mental health journal brought to life, where your emotions live as magical creatures. So you grow plants and nourish this garden by journaling about your mental health and your emotions. And then these plants attract void pets. There are other journaling mood tracking apps that you could try as well, such as How We Feel, and there's also Dailyo. If you love data and graphs, Dailyo might be the one for you. You can track your mood in relation to your activities so you can recognize patterns. And if you have a specific worry that you want to write down, you can download an app called Worry Dolls. Here's a description from the person who designed, which you can then tell your worry to. Over time, you can track the worry by telling the doll more about it. When the worry is finished, you can send the doll to the land of finished worries. Why do I want to cry? The intention is that you track your worries. You will see over time that they were not as bad as you feared. It's also a mindfulness technique to note what you're anxious about. Hope you like it. It's totally free, no ads, secure, and the data you enter doesn't leave your phone. No profit motive here. I am just an anxious person, so wanted to try to make something to help others. They sound really sweet. There's a chronic illness and mental health symptom tracker called Bearable, which also has a really cute art style. You can track emotions as well on on that one, but you can also track physical health, pain severity, energy levels, medications, goals. It seems like autistic people are more likely to have quite a few different chronic health conditions, so this could be a good one. Medisafe is a medication management app that can remind you to take your medication. There's an app called Ahoy, which I think is just currently available in the US and Canada, but it's an app where disabled people can rate businesses and public places on whether or not they're accessible. This started out for the limited mobility community, but they've just added a section for sensory needs too. You might find meditation, mindfulness, soundscape apps helpful too. I've spoken about Aura in the past. There's also Endel, Headspace, My Noise. If you have to work in a public space and you find sounds distracting, putting on your headphones and listening to some sort of soundscape can be great. I always quite like rain noise and things like that. That can be helpful for falling asleep too. Speaking of mindfulness, there's an app called Buzzkill, and this helps you manage notifications. As somebody who finds notifications, I don't know, I feel like my soul leaves my body when I'm interrupted by a notification. So here are some of the things that Buzzkill does. So Buzzkill can provide a cooldown so you don't get buzzed multiple times when someone messages you multiple times in quick succession. You can also set a custom sound or vibration pattern for a specific contact or phrase, and it will also automatically swipe away any notification you don't want to see without hiding all notifications for that one particular app. So you can maybe be a bit more selective about the notifications that you get. A lot of autistic people do tend to struggle with interruptions. If you want to know more about that, I have a video about the theory of monotropism, which might explain if you are that way. So this one could be super helpful. Someone mentioned Character AI on the community post, which has different user-made chatbots. Discord can be a great option. I have a Discord community which is connected to my Patreon, so you have to be joined to my Patreon. You can join any tier on the Patreon and then you get access to the Discord server as well. You just need to link your Discord to Patreon. You also get access to all of my exclusive content on there as well if you join, and it's a lovely space. Lots of different channels for lots of different interests, and if you find it overwhelming you can mute channels that don't apply to you as well. But there are loads of other Discord servers, and there are lots of free Discord servers. There's like a Taylor Swift Discord server, say if Taylor Swift was a special interest, where you can chat and meet people. It can be a lot easier for autistic people to do, you know, written communication. I find that a lot easier sometimes, and yeah, you could end up finding that you make some real life friends. I've met some people in real life from my Discord server, which was really lovely. But yeah, before it gets too soppy, let's move on to some workplace accommodations. So first of all, we have being able to wear noise cancelling headphones in the office, and or being allowed to play music while you work. This would be a big one for me, allowing you not to wear uniform or a more sensory friendly variation of a uniform. Being allowed to work from home or hybrid could be super helpful. This might be something if you're currently searching for a job to prioritize in your job search, because I think that could make a huge difference. Flexible hours could also be super helpful. Like some autistic people have interesting body clocks. Sometimes we don't work super well to a typical schedule. I'm filming this at midnight, of course. A flexible start and end time might be possible so you can avoid rush hour traffic or like super busy public transport if you find that overwhelming. And being allowed to work flexible hours and having a flexible start time could be super helpful if you struggle with time blindness and feel a lot of anxiety about having to be there at, you know, like one specific time. I used to really struggle with this. When I went into work at Lush, it was really hard for me to get there on time and not be ridiculously early or slightly late. It might be an option for you to leave work early if you become overwhelmed, or maybe go and do the rest of the day from home if you become overwhelmed, and or maybe at work they could give you access to a dimly lit quiet space for you to go into to recover if you are feeling overwhelmed. Being given your own office might be possible, where you can control things like the lighting and the temperature of the room. If that's not possible, you might be able to have your own desk space. Some workplaces do something called hot desking, where people just, you know, pick which desk they want when they get get there on the day, which I think I would personally find really stressful. So having a desk that is your own, that you can try and, make as sensory friendly as possible for whatever your specific needs are. Being allowed to have a fan or maybe an electric heater at your desk to help you to regulate your temperature is another one. And this is something you could do to accommodate yourself, but if you are time blind like me, having a visual timer to help you keep track of time, although sometimes I find this quite anxiety inducing. I'm time blind, but I often will hide the time on my laptop and things like that, so I can't see it because it stresses me out, the feeling of time slipping away. I think it just can be quite unsettling when I get into hyperfocus and time just zooms by so fast. I don't like it. I don't like my day disappearing. Come back. And having a desk in a quieter place might be helpful for some autistic people so they're away from distractions. I found it near impossible to study in college during free periods when there were even just little sounds. In exams, I found it really hard as well. Just sounds of people, clicking their pen, coughing. Might not affect all autistic people, but for some of us, it can really pull us out of what we're doing and be quite jarring. Making colleagues aware that interruptions are hard for an autistic person, if that is the case, could be super useful. I think having colleagues be aware of how you prefer to be approached and communicated with, and whether you like being touched or not, could be really helpful in general. Whether or not you want to disclose to everybody, it might be helpful to have a workplace buddy, somebody who can explain to you the social rules, check in on you, make sure you're doing okay. Maybe, if you don't want to tell the entire office, that could be one person aside from your manager who is aware that you are autistic. Regular meetings with your manager to reassure you that you're on the right track might help you to ease anxiety. Being offered a quiet space to eat lunch as well. A few years ago, I had to do this kind of training thing with a bunch of people I didn't know, and every lunchtime I ran away to my car, and it was blissful to sit on my own in my car and just get a bit of time to recover. And also being a bit flexible about when you take your lunch, so you can take your lunch at a quieter time, say if you do want to eat in like a canteen. Being allowed to skip certain meetings if they're not that important. Again, being allowed to leave meetings if you're feeling overwhelmed, if it's not too disturbing, being allowed to get up and walk around if you feel restless, or being allowed to use a fidget, and just in general using a fidget around the office. An Ono roller, I'm not sure how to say that, but those seem to come highly recommended and they're very quiet. Apparently it's supposed to be like the feeling of rolling two highlighter pens together, but there are loads of different types of fidgets. I've also seen people recommend jewelry or key rings with little beads on them that you can fidget with. Being allowed breaks after working with clients or doing work that's more social in nature. This person on TikTok shared that their manager had allowed this.
Having breaks after meetings or clients. Now, if you don't work with clients, that is fine, but if you have work meetings or anything in work where there's going to be like a high amount of stress or social interaction, then you can just ask to have a break after this. It is an extra break and not taken off your lunch. Managers might say, yeah, okay, take 5 minutes off your lunch. No. The adjustment is that you get that extra 5 minutes.
Oh, this is a big one. Permission to skip team building exercises and retreats and social gatherings and things like Christmas parties, without anybody being offended or taking it personally. If you have a part-time job, being able to work the same hours every week could be super helpful. I know when I worked at Lush as a sales assistant, you'd be maybe given a couple of weeks notice on what days you'd need to be working, and it would have been nice to know, like, I work Mondays between this hour and this hour. Like sometimes I'd get there and they'd be like, oh, we might want you to stay an extra few hours if you can, and you'd feel kind of like you couldn't say no in the moment. I didn't always mind, but like for some autistic people that might be super stressful. And I think also you could maybe make it clear to your employer that you'd rather not be asked on the day if you could do any extra hours, because I know for some people pleasing will kick in and will find it difficult to say no. But yeah, having the predictability even in a full-time role for some autistic people of like a daily schedule could be super helpful. I think for me, I'm somebody who can be a little bit more impulsive than some autistic people, but I would still find it super stressful if I got into work and I'd been expecting that I was going to do one thing and then they were like, oh, we need you to actually throw that all away and make a phone call to someone you've never spoken to before. I would prefer to know what I was doing in advance, and I think a lot of autistic people would. Being warned of all meetings or any sort of change to the usual routine in advance, and also being told what meetings will be about beforehand. Maybe you could even be emailed notes of important topics that will be covered within the meeting. Similarly, when you're having a job interview, it might be helpful to be emailed the questions before the job interview. Some people only like to disclose their diagnosis after they've actually got a job, which is completely fine. In general, always keeping instructions and expectations clear and precise and explicit, not expecting your employees to read between the lines or fill in the gaps. I'd really recommend this book, Unmasked by Ellie Middleton. I read and reviewed it over on my Patreon. There's an hour-long kind of like cozy vlog styled video of me going through this over on Patreon. I also did a Ryan Kelly's book, Autism Feels. But there's a lot of great sections about potential workplace accommodations in this book. I will leave a link to it in the description. On page 254, Ellie talks about the what, by when, and why framework, which I really love. So it goes, what exactly do you need from me? When exactly do you need each of these things by? Why exactly do you need each of those things to be done? And I think the why is really big and important, because I think sometimes people can misinterpret autistic people needing to know the why behind what they're doing as them kind of questioning authority or trying to undermine somebody. I think it can help us to understand the task at hand more, like this is the expected outcome, so now I know I need to do these steps in this way, and it all makes a bit more sense. Also, remember that autistic people might need a bit more time to process information, and with this one you can always accommodate yourself as well by kind of having certain set phrases that you say to give yourself more time. I have learned over time that I shouldn't respond to things on the spot on the phone, because I can end up agreeing to things that I don't actually want to agree to. So most of the time, if somebody asks me a question on the phone, because I find phone calls quite stressful and maybe not in my right mind, I'll say, oh, okay, let me just look into that and I'll get back to you, or I'll discuss it with, my partner or whatever, and then I'll give you an email back, whatever's appropriate for the situation. Just try and give myself some more time, and people are always fine with that. But I think an employer having patience with you is really important. I used to get in trouble as a child sometimes because I'd be asked to do something and then I'd kind of freeze and be like, oh, what was I asked to do? What do I need to do? And how do I need to do that? And it can take autistic people a while to pivot from whatever was going on in their head, whatever track they were on, and pull themselves away from that and go, okay, now I'm doing this other thing. And so sometimes we might just need a bit more time. It's this whole autistic inertia thing, which I spoke about in this video, that we can struggle with. Again, it's all linked to the theory of monotropism. It's not somebody being lazy or rude if it takes them a while to process what you've asked them to do. And it isn't an indication that somebody's going to be, bad at completing that task. I know I definitely struggle with verbal instructions. Again, particularly if they're over the phone, I tend to spend the entirety of any phone calls I do writing down what the person's saying, and I'll literally just write down anything. They're like, hi, how are you? I'm writing it down to make sure that I don't miss anything, and I often forget what's said. I remember this time where I had a health issue and I needed to go to an out of hours doctor. It was kind of quite urgent, and they said the name of a healthcare center near me, and I just quickly jotted down what I thought I heard, but I wasn't sure. But in the moment, I don't think to ask them to repeat themselves, and I'm kind of in people pleasing mode and just focusing on being pleasant on the phone and saying the right things and kind of getting off the phone as quickly as possible sometimes. And then afterwards I was like, I have no idea what that is, and I had to sit there on Google and try and deduce which one the name that I'd written down, which was completely wrong, was most similar to. I did eventually find it, luckily, in time for the appointment that I booked. I don't know, I was lucky with that one. I think written instructions can be a lot easier. Verbal instructions can poof out of your mind if you struggle with working memory, which is again something I spoke about in my most recent video about signs that you might be neurotypical, but is actually a sign that you might be neurodivergent. Just generally being allowed to communicate in your preferred style. So if you prefer communicating by email, some autistic people hate email and might prefer speaking over the phone or via video call so they can see your face, or just in person, face to face. And it might be useful to use AAC or sign language if you find yourself unable to speak. This was a big one. If you are going to have a phone call, being told what the phone call is going to be about ahead of time, because I think we can struggle a lot with the uncertainty around social interactions. I hate it when somebody leaves me a voicemail and they do not tell me what they were calling about, and I have to call them back and I have no idea. When people just leave a voice message like, just call me back as soon as you can, it makes you stressed. You feel like it's an emergency, like it's going to be something really bad, and usually it's like nothing. And it's like, you could have just told me that in a few sentences. You might also be able to ask for help with time management and prioritization of tasks, but this is probably quite individual. For some autistic people, they might find it annoying or like micromanagey. For both school and work, providing information and worksheets on coloured paper can be quite useful if you struggle to read black text on white paper. So that's a nice transition into school/studying accommodations. So once again, being allowed to either wear noise cancelling headphones or ear defenders in school, being allowed to wear sunglasses, being allowed to use a fidget in class, extra time in exams. Oh my goodness, I wish I had access to this. This can be helpful for a load of different types of neurodivergence. I wasted a lot of time in exams stressing and worrying about being perfect, and sometimes I'd write a full paragraph and I'd cross the whole thing out because I'd feel like it wouldn't be perfect, and sometimes I would end up missing big high mark questions towards the end of the exam because I'd wasted time trying to be perfect at the start of the exam. Some people on my community tab shared that they'd been able to get an extra 50% added on to their exam time, which sounds just amazing. Breaks in exams may also be helpful. I was kind of accidentally given this accommodation by having panic attacks. I was allowed to go into a toilet cubicle this one time and I was given a mint by a teacher to try and calm me down. But yeah, actual organized breaks maybe might help to prevent the mental breakdown. Being allowed to take exams in a smaller or a private room. After I dropped out of college, I did some studying through distance learning, and then I went to a high school to do the exams. And I remember being put in a private room for one of them, being put in like a teacher's office, and I was just left there. And it was fine until unfortunately all of the students were let out of lesson, and then they all rushed into the corridor and they were outside the door, and it was so loud. And I don't know why they chose to put me there. That was not very sensory friendly, and I'm sat there trying to write this essay and I can hear, high school students in the corridor. It wasn't supposed to be an autism accommodation, so hopefully if this is done as an accommodation, it will be a quiet private room. Numerous people on my community tab also said they were actually allowed to listen to music during an exam to help with focus, which is pretty cool. Being allowed to eat lunch privately or with just one other student or with a teacher while at school. I used to actually eat lunch in the classroom because my best friend actually had selective mutism. So because she didn't like to eat in front of other people, I was able to sit with her. So I got an accidental accommodation through her, which was great because a few times that I did have to go into the dining hall in primary school, it was so loud with all the clashing cutlery and the overlapping conversations. It was really unpleasant and smelly, really smelly. People's lunches stink. I was also allowed to go home for lunch for a time. This was an accidental autism accommodation that I was given because I was struggling with school avoidance and not wanting to go into school and finding it too much. They were like, okay, you can have a break in the middle of the day, you can go home for a while. Because I wasn't diagnosed, when I was given these kind of accidental, in quotation marks, accommodations, there was always kind of an underlying expectation of, we can give you this for a short time, but you need to sort yourself out. This can't go on for a long time. Whereas I feel like if I was diagnosed, maybe I could have just been accepted and it could have just been allowed that maybe Meg just needs a break in the middle of the day. So my mom used to walk and pick me up, used to walk home, eat some buttered pasta, watch a bit of TV, and then come back to school. And it was really helpful to have that little break. Just being allowed to finish the school day earlier or do half days sometimes. I don't know how it works in other countries, but in the UK in primary school, your lunch tends to be split between eating in the lunch hall and also playing on the playground. And at my school, we had a boy who was diagnosed autistic and he was allowed to read in the classroom. And I asked if I could be allowed to do the same thing. I was super jealous and I was told no, because, he's autistic, you're not autistic, so you can't do that, and you must socialize. You seem social enough to be socializing, so you need to go out. Yeah, I've still not got over that. I'm still bitter. It was one of my favorite teachers who did that to me as well. She was like, oh, if you read on the playground, I'm sure in no time children will come up to you and want to talk to you and ask you about what you were reading. And I was there thinking, I don't want anyone to come and ask me what I'm reading. I just want to read. And I think it would have been so helpful to just have a nice peaceful moment rather than being out on the playground with a bunch of screaming children, because, you know, like the rest of the day you have to socialize quite a lot. You know, you're doing group tasks and things like that. Like the whole day is a social experience. So yeah, just having that bit of quiet time would have been blissful for me. It reminds me of this meme that's like, you'll have fun with the others. And then she says, but I was already having fun. Yeah, I don't know, this expectation that like socializing is always peak fun, like that doesn't always apply to autistic people. Some people in the community tab mentioned being allowed to sit out of events. In America, things like pep rallies, which I think can be quite loud. In the UK, I guess our equivalent would be big assemblies. Maybe you could stay back in the classroom and read, maybe. Being excused from fire drills or being given prior warning. Not being called on in class to answer questions if you find this super overwhelming and anxiety inducing. Freedom to leave the classroom if you're feeling overwhelmed is a big one that I know a lot of students in the UK are able to do. You might have some sort of pass or card that you can show the teacher. Some schools might have a sensory room, which would be really lovely that you could go to, or just, you know, maybe a quiet space. Being allowed to leave a class early before the end of the class so you have a bit more time to get to your next lesson if things are spread far apart, particularly in high school or college. You can avoid the big rush. I don't know what your high school was like, but the corridors were always crammed full of people. There was a lot of pushing and shoving, and it was pretty scary. Maybe you could be allowed to come into or leave school a bit earlier or later for the same reason as well. Ooh, a big one, being allowed to use a laptop to take notes, particularly if you have a dyspraxia diagnosis as well, as many autistic people do. Allowing you to have freedom over where you sit in a classroom or not being moved from your set seat. I used to have so much anxiety. There were a few times where I had to go and speak to a teacher and ask, please, will you move me back? And luckily, sometimes they did. Being allowed to use alternative forms of communication when necessary. So if you feel like you're unable to speak, if you shut down, writing things down, maybe using AAC, maybe using sign language. I guess it's just having teachers be aware that this is something that can happen to you. It's a real thing. It's not you being, you know, rude or naughty or anything like that. Someone in my community tab said their school stopped marking them down for spelling unless the assignment was about their spelling, and that their grades really shot up when this happened. I think that's super fair. We have spell checker these days. Again, this could be another reason why using a laptop in class could be great if you maybe are dyslexic as well and you struggle with spelling. I'd have loved to do exams on computer because like I would have got less stress and I wouldn't have had the whole thing of like crossing things out, because I could have just like backspace. I don't know, it wouldn't have been as panic inducing. You might be able to be given access to an audiobook version of a book you're reading in class. Sometimes it can be helpful for neurodivergent people to listen to an audiobook and read a book at the same time. Allowing you to extend due dates or be a bit more flexible about when assignments are handed in could be great. I'm currently studying with distance learning through the Open University, and they're super flexible about extending assignment dates, and I find this reduces the anxiety and kind of the demand avoidance that I experience around it so much. Someone on my community tab says they have quite a rigid process, and that can mean that it takes them longer to complete assignments. Maybe there's set steps that you feel like you have to do. A lot of autistic people, it's been documented for like as long as autism has been documented, that a lot of us are perfectionists, and that can mean that it takes you longer to do stuff. And yeah, for me, this was definitely true. I could be quite slow with finishing assignments. I think being given assignments early is another way potentially around the whole demand avoidance thing. I've got a few videos about the pathological demand avoidance profile of autism, but a lot of autistic people, whether you identify with that or not, experience demand avoidance. We can find it difficult to do stuff when we're told to do stuff. I think sometimes it's better to think of it as demand anxiety. It can be really stressful to feel like you have to do something at a certain date, and that can cause procrastination. Again, a lot of people who identify with this whole demand avoidance thing are perfectionists. I find doing things early can make me feel like I've won. I've got one over on them. Ha, you told me to do it by this date. I actually did it 2 weeks before. So there, in your face. That's kind of like, instead of doing it late, I can win, in quotation marks, by doing it early, or doing things in like the wrong order. I don't know. I really like with the Open University that you can see a lot of your assignments in advance. And yeah, this
might be a useful thing for your autistic students as well, to let them know what they can expect is coming up throughout the year so that they can mentally plan. Particularly with university, you might be able to access a recording if you miss a lecture, and you might be able to record in class yourself too. You might be able to get more information about a class ahead of time, like a teacher could send you the presentation that they're going to do, so you just kind of are aware of what's coming up and maybe can do a bit of reading about it beforehand, or be sent the presentation after the fact if you struggle with note taking. Again, as I said with the jobs thing, just being allowed to ask questions, being allowed to ask why without a teacher taking it personally or taking it as if you're questioning their teaching style would be really nice. We just tend to like direct communication and like to know completely what is going on and what is expected of us. Being allowed to not do presentations or opting out of group work as well. This was an accommodation that I accidentally got as well. I'd often ask, can I just do the task on my own? And I would be told yes, usually, which was nice. But if you do have to do a presentation, maybe presenting to a smaller group of people or presenting to just the teacher could be an option if this makes you anxious. Some autistic people love public speaking. Being allowed to take on fewer subjects to reduce overwhelm. Sometimes you don't need to actually do as many subjects as they sign you up for to get into college or university. Similar to working from home, some autistic people might be able to switch to online school or homeschooling. I wish I had been homeschooled. I probably would have been if I had been diagnosed, but who knows, my whole life would be completely different, so I can't really dwell. When I look at that list, I think it mainly just comes down to kindness and willingness to take the time to understand somebody's neurodivergence and to take it seriously and maybe research and find out what that label actually means and understand that student or employee's specific presentation as well. As I say, it will not be one size fits all. Take what you want from this list, of course, and just leave the rest. And it's not an exhaustive list. I could do a whole nother one probably. So look around online, you might find even more, note them all down. Hopefully this will be helpful. I wouldn't know where to start without autistic people sharing what they've been able to access online. I'd feel kind of cheeky for asking for anything. Maybe it's reassuring to know that everything on this list somebody else has asked for and been able to access. A lot of these things seem really small, but they could be the difference between us being able to complete education or not, and also being able to hold down a job or not. If you missed last week's video about signs you might be neurotypical, you might find that one useful. Basically, it's kind of just like a backwards way of making signs you might be neurodivergent, so autistic or ADHD, signs that you maybe diverge from the norm neurologically and might be somebody who needs some of these supports. And I also made a video about 70 plus jobs that might work for autistic people, so I'll leave that linked as well. If you are able to and you would like more content like this, you are more than welcome to support me over on Patreon. I post 2 exclusive videos a month, and you can also access the Discord server on any tier. The lowest tier is $4 and X-Tiles will be linked down below if you would like to try it for free. You may as well. I'll see you in my next video very soon. Bye bye.